Okay, time to tackle the most unique role in the entire game, the Commander. The Commander plays quite differently to everything else in Hell Let Loose, which means there is a lot to go over here, from abilities and gameplay to how to actually lead a bunch of randoms that might or might not cooperate with you. So in this video, which will probably be pretty long, I'll be going over the following topics: when to play Commander, mechanics, organization and communication, and supporting your team. So let's start from the top. When to play Commander. Let me just say something. You shouldn't play Commander if you don't have a good grasp on the game. If you don't know what nodes do, what munitions are, if you've never fired the artillery guns or played squad leader effectively and know your way around the game, don't play Commander. As Commander, you must not only understand every aspect of the game mechanics, but you should also have a firm grasp on some of the tactics involved, like knowing the importance of placing garrisons, how sectors get captured, and so on. If you don't have this fundamental grasp on the game, I would really advise against playing as Commander and instead taking the time to get some more knowledge and experience. Some people might disagree with this and say that, yeah, you should totally practice playing Commander if no one else is doing it because it's better than nothing. But I would argue that you will just be learning to control the Commander UI and not actually learning the role itself, because a lot of what you need to learn to be able to command effectively is not learned by playing Commander, but rather all the other roles in the game. So that said, let's talk about the mechanics of playing Commander. Most of your time should be spent looking at the map. This is where you have all the information you need. You can see your resources, your abilities and their cooldowns, and where everyone is on the map. The way you use your abilities is pretty simple. You click on the name and then on the icon on the right to confirm and deploy or use that ability. For some, like deploying a tank or using bombing runs, you will also need to specify where on the map you want to use that. Bombing runs or recon planes will target the point you click on and can be rotated in increments of 45 degrees by clicking on the icon on the map. If you want to deselect them, you can just click back on the name. You should be alive all the time unless you're redeploying for some very specific purpose, like using the arty or deleting one of your garrisons. In public matches, you can make yourself useful by staying back and using your supply drops to build defensive garrisons, but I'll talk more about that later. In any case, you shouldn't really be using your gun a whole lot. If you're dying to enemy fire more or less frequently, then you should deploy to a safer location. In public matches, what I tend to do is play on the back line, dropping supplies to build additional garrisons, or even dropping one way on the edge of the map to get someone to build nodes. It's much easier to get someone to help build nodes if you can provide him with a spawn point and some supplies. You can also patrol around some essential backline garrisons and hide nearby, so if anyone tries to dismantle them, you can either kill them or replace the garrison right away. Against a good team, none of this will work, since all of those supplies you drop will get spotted, so you can only get away with it in some public matches. Now let's talk about what you're supposed to be doing with all your skills. In short, there's two things that you need to be concerned about: organization and support. Take a look at the map and think about what needs to be done. Do you have at least one squad defending? Do you have nodes? Is everyone blindly pushing the front line, or do you have squads flanking? Do you have enough resources? Do you have enough garrisons? Do your tanks have repair stations? You need to constantly check these things and make sure that what needs to be done gets done. This, unfortunately, is a lot easier said than done, because you need to ask squad leaders to do all these things, and squad leaders in public matches can be a pretty mixed bag. But it's all good, because here's a little tip that you might have learned while playing Commander. Don't just say stuff like, I need someone to build nodes. There's a lot of vagueness there that allows people not to take responsibility and hide under the quote-unquote someone else will do it mentality. You have a much better chance of getting those nodes built by saying, Hey Easy Squad, I need you to go to grid square H3 and build all 6 nodes please. Be extremely specific with what needs to be done. An even better way is saying, hey Easy Squad, you're doing a great push into enemy territory, but I need you to please build some nodes on H3. I would really appreciate it. Same goes for every other command that you might want to use. Hey Jig Squad, I need you to fall back and defend crossroads. Build some tank traps and 3 garrisons around the point, please. That's much better than saying, hey, who wants to fall back and defend? Complement squads and tell specific squad leaders what to do and why. If you're a good squad leader, that experience of having to lead 5 random squad mates will translate perfectly to the commander role. If the squad leader refuses to do what you need or delays too much, get another squad to do it and just repeat the process until it gets done. If you don't have patience for this, then, maybe don't play commander, because this loop of giving instructions and struggling to find someone willing to follow them is pretty much the bread and butter of this role. You will play games where everything goes great and most people respond and gladly follow your instructions, and others where you will just go crazy trying to get anything done. Whatever the case, remember to keep control of the situation. Never insult anyone, don't get toxic, and try to keep the commander channel free of any unnecessary chatter. Saying things like, hey, there's a tiger on the left, or I'm getting shot from that group of houses. That helps no one and only adds confusion to whatever is going on. Use your map marks as much as possible. Whenever you use a recon plane, let the squad leaders know beforehand, and after it's gone through, mark any red diamonds as tanks and any infantry clusters that you might see with your infantry mark. The next key aspect is supporting your team, which you do through your abilities, so let's go over them. Abilities use one of your 3 pools of resources: munitions, manpower, and fuel. As of right now, manpower is extremely hard to get a hold of since it gets depleted every time someone dies. So what usually happens is you get to use your manpower abilities during the first few minutes of a match and then never again. Resource availability is entirely dependent on the nodes that you have and how often you use your skills, so make sure that you never run out. If you don't have nodes, then you just shouldn't use your abilities until it's absolutely necessary. Instead of going each of these by the type of resource they use, I'll go over them in order of priority, starting with the ones that you want to use most frequently and ending with the ones that you rarely ever want to use. First of all, the Recon Plane. The Recon Plane costs 25 munitions and has a cooldown of 5 minutes. This is maybe the strongest ability that the commander has. Being able to see where the enemy is insanely strong in any game. So use it often and try to pair it with a good artillery player whenever possible. Try to take a good look at the map first and think about where the Recon Plane will be most useful. You want to detect the bulk of the enemy infantry whenever possible. Never ever use it for catching an enemy recon or anything like that. Speaking of which, artillery, while not a commander skill per se, should be used as part of the commander's arsenal of tools. Tell your artillery users where to shoot and when to stop shooting to save munitions. If no one is using the arty, then either ask someone to do it or do it yourself. Next up we have Final Stand. This costs only 30 manpower and lasts for 1 minute, and it allows you to use everything that's not on cooldown for free. However, if you don't have enough supplies for something, Final Stand won't magically allow you to deploy those skills. Despite this, it is incredibly powerful. Use it before using costly abilities like bombing runs or airheads. Want to deploy tanks without using fuel or drop smoke using the artillery? Then use Final Stand. There are countless ways this can be combined to maximize its use, but don't feel like you need to use everything you have, since then you'll have everything on cooldown for quite some time. Final Stand has a 10-minute cooldown, so you won't get to use it very often. Now let's talk about Airheads. Airheads are the ultimate ninja garrison. which is ironic given they were introduced in an update that attempted to solve that problem. They cost 75 manpower, which is quite a number, and have a 10-minute cooldown. Airheads allow you to create a temporary garrison on enemy territory, but more likely than not, you will only ever get to use it once per round given how manpower works right now. Never place an airhead directly on an enemy strongpoint or even too close to one, since they will easily get dismantled or block if an enemy is too close. Try to place them somewhere that will allow your team to spread out from the airhead and establish good OPs. Don't think of them as an easy way to start capping a point, but rather as a way to position a sizable amount of troops behind enemy lines to create a solid assault on the enemy position. Airheads can also backfire by leaving you with no one to defend, as everyone redeploys to them, so only use them when you have a solid defense in place. Next up, the bombing run. This is easily everyone's favorite, since it allows you to completely decimate the enemy with some good old-fashioned air support. Bombing runs cost 85 munitions and have a cooldown of 10 minutes. Most commanders seem to use them for offensive pushes, but I tend to have them saved up as a defensive countermeasure because that's when they are most effective. It depends on the map, but if you're attacking a sector that has a lot of cover like buildings or trenches, a bombing run won't be very effective, since many enemy soldiers will be behind cover or inside buildings. When you're defending and the point gets overrun, chances are the enemy is still running around in the open and isn't entrenched, meaning that a bombing run will be much more effective and it will allow your squad to move in to retake the position afterwards. Whatever way you choose to use them, never use them to just get some frags. Even if you see a bunch of enemies piled up, unless there is some strategic value to be gained, refrain from using the bombing run, since whatever enemies you kill will probably respawn and get back to where they were shortly after. Supply drops are probably the single most spammed item in the entire game, but they are a double-edged sword of sorts. First off, they cost 15 munitions, so, not a lot, but given how often you can use them, thanks to the short 2-minute cooldown, those 15 munitions can add up and end up crippling your resources. Secondly, they are extremely easy to spot, which means enemies 1 or 2 grid squares away, or maybe even more, will be able to see them and learn that you just placed a garrison there. Your squad leaders will often request supplies whenever possible to build the garrisons that you just asked them to build. Deny that request almost always and explain that A, you don't want the enemy finding out where you are, and B, they can have someone redeploy, spawn a support, and set supplies down much faster than it takes for the supply drops to reach the ground, so it's even better for them to do that. Next up, reinforce. Reinforce will boost how much your soldiers count towards the cap rate of a friendly sector, so use it whenever you want to boost your defenses a bit and buy some time to counter an enemy attack. It only works when you're defending, not attacking, so keep that in mind. Reinforce costs 35 manpower, is active for 2 minutes, and has a 5-minute cooldown. And lastly, we have the 2 abilities that you should pretty much just never use. Encourage doubles the amount of resources that you gain from captured sectors. If you take a look at the map, you will see that points have a node on them, which passively generates a +3 of whatever resource. When you pop Encourage, that will go to +6 for 5 minutes, which means you get a whopping 3 more resources per minute for 5 minutes, adding up to 15 additional resources. This is just, completely and utterly worthless, to be honest, unless you're playing defense on offense, which means you start with everything capped. In that case, I would use it as soon as possible to get the most out of it. It costs 35 manpower and runs on a 10-minute cooldown. And next, we have Strafing Run, which is just a complete waste of time, resources, assets, and screen space. Strafing Run costs 50 munitions, which is probably like 10% of your entire munitions stockpile at any given point. Or, you could think of it as costing 16 artillery shots and a half, which is just a massive amount of firepower. There is not a single positive thing that I can think of when it comes to strafing runs. You can maybe kill 1 or 2 enemies with it, which makes it a complete joke. If anything, this is a trap that sabotages bad commanders by draining their munitions as a consequence of not knowing what they're doing. It's on a 4-minute cooldown, which gives you plenty of opportunities to get rid of your munitions and get absolutely nothing in return. Unless you are dominating the enemy and the round is almost over, or you're just absolutely drowning in munitions, you should never ever use this. Actually, if your team's commander is using this, please tell him to stop. Absent from this list are all tank redeployment options because they are fairly straightforward. For the allies, you should only ever deploy Sherman 76 tanks because the 75 tank costs the same and is much worse. Deploy as many 76s as you can. If you're German, you can choose to deploy Tigers or Panthers, which I would do so at the request of my armored crews. If you have fuel to spare and plenty of tanks, deploy these in advance to make sure you don't run into a cooldown while a tank crew needs a tank. Speaking of which, the relationship between tanks and commanders is a difficult one. As commander, make sure your tank crews have repair stations around the map. Preferably more than one, since they will dramatically increase your tank's survivability. And now, some words of wisdom. If you need to tell your tanks what to do, then they are not good tankers and will probably fail at whatever task is requested. If you have good tankers, you will just barely have to interact with them other than just letting them know where the enemy tanks are. If you need to ask support from your tanks, however, like asking them to back an offensive push or something, keep in mind that the tank might be low on ammunition, damaged, or you might be sending them somewhere where they are highly visible. In other words, you might get them killed. So be mindful of that, and hopefully you get some tank experience under your belt to help you understand this better. Everything that I've said so far should allow you to play Commander effectively, which doesn't necessarily mean that you will be winning a lot, because that depends more on the squad leaders than on the commander. At least now you should have a good understanding of the different skills and whether or not they are useful. As a final reminder, make sure that you always have enough defensive garrisons around each point. Garrisons are the single most important part of the entire game, so use your role as commander to make sure they get built. Alright guys, that will be all for today. If you have any suggestions or comments, please leave them down below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I hope I will catch you in the next one.